Thank you, Clinton. It's already been a very hectic day. So many plenaries and the parallel sessions. But I just want you to hang in there for just a few more minutes as I do this last plenary presentation for today. For me, this is the third International Bible Conference that I'm participating in since I have been at the BRI. I've been blessed by each one of them, and I've also had the opportunity to present at each one of them. Earlier on this afternoon, somebody whose name will remain undisclosed came to me and said, "You are presenting tonight. We are going to listen to you carefully." I think he said it in jest. But I hope you do. And I pray that this presentation might not come across to you as trivial, but that it will be substantive and meaningful to you. I have written a longer paper, about 34 pages in length, and I realized that if I were to read it here, it would take so much time. So what I did was to summarize it in almost an outline form in PowerPoint. Actually, the important thing to me in this presentation is not you getting the nitty-gritty details. That you can read in the paper later on. But I just want you to follow the logic that I am adopting in this presentation. That is more important to me. So I've put some texts in PowerPoint, and I did that for one important reason. Some parts of the presentation, especially the scientific side, might be a little unfamiliar to some of us, and there are quotations that I thought it would be helpful for you to read along as we move along. And so the topic is theistic evolution and its implications. This work? Sorry. Okay. One of the more important topics in theology these days is the conversation between Christian theology and science. It's becoming very increasingly an important topic. And I suppose there are several reasons why it is so. In fact, I read that new insights in physics, especially nuclear physics, are helping people to see situations and instances where God could actually intervene and use natural processes for his purposes. And so physics may be one of the reasons why we are seeing this increasing discussion between theology and science at this time. So there may be other reasons as well, but I think we cannot forget the fact that postmodernism has been a strong factor in this development. You see, it's no wonder that we did not read much about this kind of dialogue in the heydays of logical positivism. Those were the days when scientific truth was the only truth. But what postmodernism has done is that it has challenged the alleged or the supposed superiority of the rationality of science in such a way that now it's open. Religion can talk. Religion has a voice. Theology has a voice, just like science has a voice. And so the postmodern challenge of science rationality has made this dialogue really important. And theistic evolution is one of the most serious attempts to reconcile the Christian view of reality and the scientific view of reality. Now, in the morning, Angel was talking about the freeze and fry. Now, for secular materialist scientists, there is really no cosmology. There is no eschatology. Freeze and fry, and that's the end of it. But theistic evolutionists do not see science and theology as in an antagonistic relation. It's not an either-or relation. They feel that there can be a positive outcome in the relationship between theology and science. You can see, for example, Howard Van Til, and I want you to empathize with these people. Listen to him. He says, if scientifically knowledgeable persons are led to believe that in order to accept the Christian gospel, they must also reject a scientific concept that they have judged by sound principles of evaluation to be the best way to account for the relevant observational and experimental evidence, then a monumental stumbling block has, I believe, been placed in their path. I don't believe that all these people are evil. They are dealing with challenges. And as he says here, they look at the evidence of science and there is something there. And they want to believe in the gospel and also believe in science. This is the challenge they have. And that's how theistic evolution comes about. But recently, I just came across this book, which was published just last year, edited by J.P. Morland and Stephen Meyer and a host of other scientists and theologians. Theistic Evolution, a scientific, philosophical, and theological critique. Now, these people lay it on the theistic evolutionists that it's no go. In fact, Stephen Meyer, who writes the introduction to that whole book, says this: the form of theistic evolution which accords creative power to neo-Darwin and or other evolutionary mechanism generates either 1, logical contradictions, 2, a theologically heterodox view of divine action, and 3, a convoluted and scientifically vacuous explanation. It's a heavy book, and it's all against theistic evolution. As Adventists, we have always had the notion that theistic evolution is theologically a threat to our system of beliefs. Now, the goal of this presentation is to test that notion. Except in this case, I'm not looking at the impact of theistic evolution on all our doctrines. I'm just looking at the impact of theistic evolution for Adventist eschatology. And I'll be moving in 3 key motions, in 3 key points. First, what is Adventist eschatology? And I hope Angel will not crucify me when I leave here, because this is what he did beautifully in the morning. But I'm adopting a different approach to it only because it helps me to evaluate theistic evolution later on. That's why I adopt this approach to it. So I first look at what Adventist eschatology is, and next I look at some evolutionary principles that underlie theistic evolution. And then in the final move, I will compare and contrast Adventist eschatology and the outline of theistic evolutionist eschatology as I would have discussed. But to begin with, what is eschatology? And again, Frank gave us a very elaborate discussion on eschatology, but I want to be simple here. As we know, it comes from the Greek eschatos, with the basic meaning of last or final. And in theological discussions, I took this from the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary. It refers to the last things in a worldwide and historical sense. example, an apocalyptic cosmic cataclysm, and a new age of conflict followed by utopian bliss. It refers to a time in the future when the course of history will be changed to such an extent that one can speak of an entirely new state of reality. More specifically, it is most often used in association with Christian doctrines concerning the second coming of Christ and God's final judgment of mankind. So that is, in a broad sense, what eschatology is. But here we are talking about Adventist eschatology. How do you distinguish Adventist eschatology from every other eschatology? And there are so many eschatologies out there. I think it was Millard Erickson who wrote a while back a book on contemporary options on eschatology. And he lays out a whole host of eschatologies. But how do you do it? I was reading his book, Erickson's book, Christian Theology, and he lays out a few questions that should help us distinguish one eschatology from another. And he asks these questions. Is eschatology thought of as pertaining primarily to the future or to the present? Is the view of the future life here on earth primarily optimistic or pessimistic? Is divine activity or human effort thought to be the agent of eschatological events? Is the focus of eschatological belief this worldly or otherworldly? Does the eschatology hold that we will come into the benefits of the new age individually, or that their bestowal will be in cosmic in character? Now, there are a few more questions, but what I did is I took all of them and then I crystallized them into 4 themes by which I will try to distinguish eschatologies: the form, the content, the agency, and the focus or the goal. So with these themes, I would examine Adventist eschatology, and I'll apply the same themes to look at theistic evolutionist views on eschatology and see whether they are compatible. And the suggestion I want to make is that when we look at Adventist eschatology, in form, it is historicist. In content, it looks for a general worsening of the circumstance of human existence and the human control until God intervenes and rectifies what is occurring. From the point of view of agency, Adventist eschatology is supernatural and looks for a genuinely transcendent working by a personal God. And in terms of focus, it is otherworldly. So let me tease out these things a little bit to make them clearer. First, the form of Adventist eschatology. And when I talk about the form, I'm talking about how Adventists generally configured the biblical material on prophecy and apocalyptic, especially the books of Daniel and when we come to these passages, these texts, how do we frame them? With what lens do we look at them? How do we configure them? This is what I mean by the form of Adventist eschatology. And I'm saying that we may describe Adventist eschatology from the point of view of form as being historicist. And again, Erickson is helpful here. He says the historicist view holds that the events described were in the future at the time of writing, but they refer to matters destined to take place throughout the history of the church. So that's what we mean by Adventist eschatology in form being historicist. And I think Dr. Pauline will agree with me here because I quoted him. This is what he said. The Seventh-day Adventist Church derives its unique witness to Jesus Christ from a historicist reading of the apocalyptic prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. He goes further actually to, in my view, point out that which is quintessential, that which is critical to the Adventist approach to historicism. And this is the issue of predictiveness. And this is what he says. The primary point of difference between the Adventist understanding of Daniel and the scholarly majority has to do with the date of the book. Whether the visions are predictive or interpretations of history after the fact. So when I say that Adventist eschatology from the point of view of form is historicist, what I'm saying is that when Adventists look at these books, Daniel and Revelation, they see that these books contain several series of outline prophecies that unfold an unbroken historical sequence of events. These are historical. These are real. Historical unbroken sequence of events leading up to the establishment of the eternal kingdom of God. This is how Adventists, at least in my view, if you are looking at our eschatology from the point of view of the form, the way we configure these prophecies, it is historicist. What about the content? So when you bring this form, this historicist form, in dialogue with the biblical material, the apocalyptic prophecies, and you bring them in dialogue, of course, using proper methods of interpretation and sound exegesis. When you bring them in dialogue, a certain cluster of ideas, of doctrines, of teachings come out, which will constitute the Adventist doctrines of eschatology. First, and these are things that we are all very familiar with, so I'll just go very quickly, is the second coming. And this represents the grand climax of the gospel. Notice, after, it comes after Christ ends his high priestly mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. And we have been taught from when I was a lay person, this coming will be literal, it will be personal, it will be visible, it will be worldwide. And at that point, there will be a first resurrection. I'm talking now about the content when you apply this historicist form to the prophetic material. There will be a first resurrection, and together with the righteous living, will be glorified and taken to heaven, but the unrighteous will die. Then there will be a second resurrection. The resurrection of the unrighteous, it takes place 1,000 years later. This 1,000 years is the millennium, the millennial reign of Christ, with his saints in heaven between the first and the second resurrections. The wicked dead will be judged at this time. During this period, the earth will be utterly desolate, without living human inhabitants, but occupied by Satan and his angels. At the close of the millennium, Christ with his saints and the holy city will descend from heaven to earth. The unrighteous dead will then be resurrected, and with Satan and his angels will surround the city. But fire from God, these are historical events. Fire from God will consume them and cleanse the earth. This will be the new earth in which righteousness dwells. It will be the eternal home for the redeemed and a perfect environment for everlasting life, love, and joy. And this is the hope that we heard about this morning. It's a challenge now. Okay. So you apply this historicist form to the prophetic material, and this cluster of beliefs come forth. But this cluster of beliefs that constitute Adventist eschatology are themselves embedded or framed within the cosmic conflict motif. Now, this conflict began in heaven with the fall of Lucifer, then came down on earth when Adam and Eve fell. And this event, the fall, had some disastrous consequences. Human nature became depraved. We became estranged from God, and death became our lot. And Satan wrested the rulership of the earth from humans. But with the fall came a promise in anticipation of the seed. And this hope of the promised works was kept alive through sacrificial rituals and prophetic representations. But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son. And on the cross, certain things were accomplished. Judgment was secured against Satan. The plan of redemption was confirmed. Atonement was made for human sin. And the moral law and the character of God was upheld. This is at the cross. But then there was Christ's resurrection and his ascension. And Revelation 12 picks this up. It depicts the church phase of the cosmic conflict following the death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. And has three phases in chapter 12. There is the early church, verse 1 to 5, the pure church of the Middle Ages, verse 6 to 16, and the church of the last days, verse 17. Now, the conflict in the last days we see the devil bringing heavy oppression and persecution to bear on God's people. But God undertakes two major actions. First is the proclamation of the three angels' message. And second is the first of three phases of the final judgment. And Revelation 14 ends with the second coming of Christ, depicted as a farmer who comes to reap the harvest of his redeemed, but also hints at the reaping and destruction of the impenitent ones. I knew this part of it was going to be a little boring because we know it already. So that is the content. You apply the historicist form to the prophetic material and it yields this content for you. But what is the agency? When we talk about the millennium, the resurrection, the second coming, by what means, by what agency does these things happen? This is the question I'm asking at this point. And to help us answer that question, we need to remember that the whole cosmic conflict motif is nurtured in apocalypticism. This is what we see in the books of Daniel and Revelation. And as we have come to understand it, apocalypticism saw the present world as evil, under the control of Satan and his human collaborators. And that world order would shortly be destroyed by God and replaced with a new one. So clearly, we are beginning to see the agency by which all of these things is happening. This replacement of the old order is not something that was envisioned as coming about naturally or through natural processes over a long period of time, but something on another plane, supernaturally and otherworldly. So it's a supernatural agency that is at work in this eschatology. But what's the focus? What's the goal? So the historicist form gives you some content which is brought about by supernatural means. For what purpose? Here we are asking, will God's promises be fulfilled in heaven? Or some place or situation radically different from what we now experience? And we read in Isaiah that God will make the heavens and the earth new. 2 Peter also speaks about the coming of the day of the Lord, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. So what's the purpose? What's the goal? It is a new creation. Obviously, this is not an ex nihilo creation as in the beginning. But it is a clear, supernatural, divine act which renews and regenerates the world. I found this quote from a commentary, very helpful. It says here, it is very clear in 2 Peter that we are not talking about repeating cycles, but about linear history, punctuated with divine judgment. We are also not talking about a necessary and natural process, and this is especially the case in Stoic materialism, but about the divine word being the cause of these judgments. So it's a supernatural act which renews the earth and brings about something completely new. And with that, I end my little analysis of Adventist eschatology from the point of view of form, which is historicist. And then, what was the next? The content, millennium, resurrection, all of that. The agency, supernatural, and the goal, a completely new creation. So what about theistic evolution? And we need to understand what is behind the scenes in theistic evolution. You know, we know the idea that this is the view that says that it was through evolution that God created and sustains the new universe. That's good. But why would people think this way? What is the stock in trade? Why do they think evolution can be a means by which God creates and sustains this universe? And friends, I will tell you this, doing this research challenged me quite a bit. Because, you know, we usually pick a few things here about theistic evolution, and then we make extrapolations. If they believe this, then it will be this and this and that. I think we need to get down and know what they are saying, what the ground rules are for them, what are the stock in trade for them. And some of these concepts that underlie theistic evolution will be known by some of us, but as we get a little further, some of them may be new. The first is common descent. Very common concept in evolution. And Darwin himself used this idea, represented it as like a branching tree, with the trunk of the tree representing the primal organism, the basic stuff, out of which branches out new forms of life. This is the idea of common descent. There's a common stock, a primary basic stuff, primal organism, and from this, everything else develops. This is the notion of common descent. If you were to represent this as a graph, you would have the vertical axis being the arrow of time, and the horizontal axis being the changes in biological forms. This is a notion of common descent. So that's the first two. And because they talk about this common, basic, primal organism, it leads to what is called a monophyletic view of the history of life. And the view is that evolution implies a gradual, continuous, and virtually infinite biological process. By the way, at this point, we are dealing with organic life and not inorganic matter. So that is common descent. Primal stuff, things develop out of it. But why do things develop out of it? Now, the power that makes this possible is what is called natural selection. It is the power that enables the change we are talking about. Natural selection does the work. It works on random changes that occur in the chemical units of the DNA and brings about adaptive complexity of life. So natural selection does the work. And if you think about it, so natural selection is like the action of an intelligent agent who looks at these changes going on in the chemical units of the DNA and goes to work and brings about changes in forms. This is why God is really not needed, because natural selection acts as an intelligent agent, bringing about this change. But let's move on. When natural selection goes to work, how does it work? This is the notion of chance. So it's not like natural selection says, okay, there are these changes going on in the DNA. I'm going directly, I know where I'm going, and then I do it. No, it works by chance, which is a way of referring to the whole Darwinian process as a random process. So it's like it goes and then it hits what it wants. Arthur Peacock says, it is through the agency. So chance is an agency. It is through the agency of rapid and frequent randomization at the molecular level of DNA that the potentialities of living matter are explored. But here's where things begin to get interesting. Because we have always believed that evolution is blind, it is purposeless, but that's not what is happening now. This paleobiologist says evolutionary processes navigate their way to predetermined outcomes. So it's not just blind. It seems to be working towards certain outcomes. And you see why this becomes a powerful means by which evolutionists think God could use this method to create and sustain the universe. Now, if chance is working towards predetermined outcomes, then comes in another concept that is very commonly held now within the scientific community, the notion of teleology. Comes from the Greek word telos, which means end, purpose, goal. And the idea that's now among the scientific community is that it looks like natural selection, chance, works in a way to reach a certain goal. This is the notion of teleology. It describes behavioral observations and phenomena that appear to be purposeful, directional, or tending towards goals, whether driven by internal or external forces. So where do scientists see teleology at work? And they say when you look at the interrelationships of structures and processes in organisms, or when you look at the adaptation of organisms, and even when you look at natural selection itself, they consider them to be teleological processes. Processes that seem to be working towards a purpose, towards a goal, towards an end. And I was reading this book by Alistair McGrath, who now expands the whole thing and comes to the conclusion that the whole universe embodies a wider teleology. In other words, when you look at the whole universe, all these things are working to bring about a complete universal end, a complete universal goal. One last concept: emergence. Friends, this is this stuff. This is now the meta-scientific interpretation of evolution in all its forms: cosmic, biological, mental, and cultural. And what is emergence? You know, when we use the word emergence, we are talking about something that, without prediction, without knowing, pops up. Some kind of novelty. It's the same idea at work here. It refers to the appearance in natural history of more and more intricately organized physical and living systems over the course of time. The idea is that as you look at natural history, as history moves along, all of a sudden things pop up that are new. And scientists believe that now they make this bold claim: everything that exists in space and time is made of particles that are known to physics. So whether they are quarks or protons or atomic nuclei or atoms themselves or molecules, these are all known by physics. And what they argue is that when these particles aggregate and attain a certain level of organizational complexity, new properties appear. These properties that appear are completely different from what was in the state before they appeared. This is the notion of emergence. The properties that emerge, however, cannot be reduced or predicted from the lower level phenomena from which it had appeared. In other words, just like when you mix hydrogen and oxygen, the water that results from it is completely different from the original hydrogen and the oxygen. So what appears is different from the phenomena from which it appeared. Nevertheless, they argue that at the higher levels, at the entities that appear, they are able to influence the actions of phenomena at the lower level. So this is the notion of emergence. So what do theistic evolutionists take away from these basic evolutionary concepts? Again, Arthur Peacock. New scientific perspectives require a reinterpretation of the classical version of creation to mean the cosmos, which is sustained and held in being by God, is a cosmos which has always been in process of producing new emergent forms of matter. And people have followed this and said that actually God or divinity appears in the course of emergence. So God is not there at the beginning. He appears along the line. People have framed a doctrine of God like that. I'll forget about this issue of hierarchy. But so they conceive of reality as being in a hierarchy where lower forms create new properties and new elements and entities. And these upper entities now are able to influence those that are down without the latter being able to influence those that are up. This is the notion of hierarchy, which Arthur Peacock himself was influential in developing. So now, the last part of my presentation. Having given Adventist or outlined Adventist eschatology from the point of view of form, content, agency, and focus or goal, let us try to do the same thing from the point of view of theistic evolution. We have said that Adventist eschatology in form is historicists, which means it presents a view of eschatology as God-ordained prophetic history which depends on the possibility of predictive prophecy. This is the Adventist view. So when Adventists look through the future, they look through the lens of predictive, God-ordained prophetic history, which is real. Well, what about theistic evolution from just the point of view of form? To begin with, the notion of prophecy is out. Here is Arthur Peacock, John Polkinghorne. If the universe is one of true becoming, with the future not yet formed and existing, and if God knows that world in its temporality, here we go, Frank, with theologians using words that you have to reread to understand what they're saying, then that seems to me to imply that God cannot yet know the future. There is no imperfection in the divine nature, for the future is not yet there to be known. Involved in the act of creation, in letting it be of truly other, is not only a kenosis of divine power, but also a kenosis of divine knowledge. It's not possible. Predictiveness is not possible in theistic evolution. There is more. But theistic evolutions, because we have spoken about Adventist eschatology from the point of view of form. What form that theistic evolutions eschatology take? It takes the form of processive developments. It's a developmental process. So they see the future not through the lens of historicism, but through the lens of transformational processes. And these processes have roots in the present world, and they go into the future. There is one gentleman who has been very consistent with this, Frank Tipler. And this is his view of theistic evolution's eschatology from the point of view of form. And I'm sure here he's talking about the freeze and fry kind of idea. And he says humanity and carbon-based life generally will certainly disappear. Whether it's the open or flat view, Jim, I don't know. But it will disappear. That much he's certain about. But then he wants, and friends, this is where my heart goes to these guys. I don't think they are evil, but they are struggling with some issues. So he wonders, but might not intelligence, in the course of moving towards this freeze or fry end, might not intelligence be able to engineer further embodiments of itself, appropriate to changing cosmic circumstances, and permitting either its infinite continuance within the decaying phase of an expanding universe, or processing of an infinite amount of information during the hectic, highly energetic final moments of a collapsing cosmos. A lot of verbiage. This is what he's saying. If you know anything about this freeze and fry, the idea is that the universe as we have it is going to expand, and it's expanding, and it's expanding. This is the open or flat view. It's expanding until it gets to the points where it all of a sudden is seized in a freeze. And that's the end. But what he is saying is that, is it not possible, as all of these things are developing towards this freeze or fry end, intelligence might somehow, under the changing circumstances, pop up with something new and continue the universe. For him, this is eschatology. It's all natural. It must come from the natural laws and causes of nature. Sorry. John Polkinghorne has actually criticized Frank Tipler and said that if there is going to be any hope, if there is going to be any eschatology, it can't come from physical, natural processes. It's based on God's love and God's faithfulness. But Polkinghorne himself is also a theistic evolutionist. And he comes up with his own idea of what the new creation will be like. And I wish we had the time to go through this because some of these words are so pregnant with meaning. He says the old creation and the new creation, he sees them as ex nihilo creation versus ex vetere creation. Let me try to explain that. Ex nihilo creation is the creation we know in Genesis. But he sees an analogy between the bodily resurrection of Christ and the new creation. And he sees continuities and discontinuities. So he's saying this new creation will be ex vetere, meaning it will come from the old. The new creation is going to come from the old creation. The old creation is God's bringing into a being a universe which is free to exist on its own. Oh dear. In the ontological space made available to it by the divine kenotic act of allowing the existence of something wholly other. The new creation is the divine redemption of the old. How do you understand these things? But basically what he's saying is this. The old creation is that out of which God will make space for the new creation. Now, if you are a theistic evolutionist, which means that you are an evolutionist, you must believe in this developmental or processive process. So, the redemption that we talk about is God bringing something new out of the old, ex vetere. And how does this happen? So notice, the new creation is a process. It's not something that a holy city descends onto the earth. It's a process. And Polkinghorne says, it's process. And friends, this passage is full of stuff. This is the new creation. Its process can be free from suffering. This is why it is new. For it is conceivable that the divinely ordained laws of nature appropriate to a world making itself through its own evolutionary history should give way to a differently constituted form of matter appropriate to a universe freely returned from independence to an existence of integration with its creator. Wow. I could just explain this paragraph and then we'll stop. Let's take it point by point. So what he's saying is that the new creation is going to be a process. It's like an evolutionary process. But he is comparing the old creation, which was also a process, and the new creation. And he says that the old creation was a creation that was making itself through evolutionary history. And that old creation had independence to do this. And in the nature of the laws that composed the old creation, suffering was possible. But he says, in the new creation, which is also going to be by a process, there cannot be suffering. Why? Because there will be a newly constituted form of matter. That's what he's saying. This newly constituted form of matter works in such a way with the natural processes that it will become integrated in God. And I will say a few more things on this towards the end to make it clear. So let me conclude, at least on the point of form. While theistic evolution's commitment to evolutionary science inclines it to adopt a developmental processive form or approach to eschatology, Adventist commitment to historicism sees eschatology as the active work of God in a God-ordained prophetic history. The two approaches are clearly incompatible. Let's move on now. How about the content? We talk about second advent, the millennium, judgment, final states of the dead, and so forth. And I said that all of these eschatological doctrines are embedded in the cosmic conflict motif. And when you think about the cosmic conflict motif, it began in heaven, then came to the Garden of Eden, where a historical person, Adam and Eve, were. And so, the content of Adventist eschatology is presupposed on the historicity of the account of Genesis 1 to 3. Without a historic understanding of Genesis 1 to 3, much of the content of Adventist eschatology will be meaningless. It will make no sense. How about theistic evolution from the point of view of content? Now, if you go to the website of what they call Biologos, there's a lot of discussion going on there. Almost all theistic evolutionists will say that Genesis 1:3 should be read as poetry and allegory and not as historical narrative. So their view is that creation was brought into being in a relatively formless state, but it was brimming with awesome potentialities for achieving a rich diversity of forms in the course of time. Now this is interesting. How about Adam and Eve? Those who are more generous will say that Adam and Eve were really not the first human beings. But there are those who say Adam and Eve were really non-existent at all. So, John Walton, Adam and Eve would not necessarily be envisioned as the first human beings, but would be elect individuals drawn out of the human population and given a particular representative role in secret space. Now, when you destroy that, you have no eschatology left, at least not from the point of view of Adventism. How about, because of the sin that happened in the garden with Adam and Eve, we have hope in Christ, his resurrection, and therefore he went to heaven and is coming to redeem us again. He's coming again. But now Paul Kinghorn says, the language of Christ ascended and sitting at the right hand of the Father is so heavily symbolic that we are not committed to the quaint picture, sometimes found in medieval stained glass, of the Lord's feet piercing from the underside of a cloud as he sets out on his space journey to the heavenly realm. In Scripture, a cloud is the symbolic presence of God, and its role in the story of ascension is to emphasize the divine authority of the exalted Christ. Nothing historical, nothing real. It's all symbolic. It's all existential. Now, but that's interesting, because if you reject Christ's physical ascension, what did Acts 1, 11 or 12 say? This Jesus that you have seen going up will come back in the same manner. But if you have destroyed the narrative in Genesis and Christ's work, obviously then the whole point of the second coming becomes a moot point. How about heaven? Poking her again. The patient process of this world will find its reflection in the redemptive process of the world to come. Our notion of heaven is delivered from any static and potentially boring conception. That's not the kind of heaven we talk about. That is not possible. Conclusion on the content of eschatology. Theistic evolution, by denying the literal historic reading of Genesis 1 to 3, so undercuts the theological foundation of the Adventist historicist approach to these eschatological doctrines as to make Adventism unrecognizable. Agency. We have seen that in Adventist eschatology, the agency is God working supernaturally in the course of history. But with theistic evolution, God works through the evolutionary process. There cannot be any divine supernatural intervention, because it raises a specter of what they call the God of the gaps, which makes God really not that great. If he did something and he has to come back to fix it, then he's not really that great after all. It's better if God did it once and it runs perfectly. That's a more perfect view of God. So divine intervention, it's not possible. Polkinghorne explains, the history of this universe is that of an unfolding process. And we have already said that the life of the world to come may also be expected to involve a similar unfolding process. Listen, the life to come, the new creation, will involve a similar unfolding process. And if there was time to go, he talks about the fact that as this new creation goes through an unfolding process, the same relationship between space, time, and matter will also operate there. And he says the same energy patterns will also operate there. So there's this continuity and continuity. But because of the newly constituted matter, the same laws of space and time and matter will work, but bring us closer to God. And he says more forcefully in his book, The Faith of a Physicist, what we must be at pains wholly to exclude is any magical notion of a divine tour de force, simply putting right, through the exercise of naked power, something which had otherwise got out of control. That must be excluded when we talk about eschatology in terms of agency. Finally, and I'm coming to an end, the focus, the goal. So for Adventists, God as an agent works directly and supernaturally in the eschaton for this purpose of resolving the problem that was created in the Garden of Eden. But Polkinghorne says, all these passages about talking about the new creation, and this morning Angel ended his discussion with this quote, beautiful quote from Revelation 21. He says, any such thing is pie in the sky. For him, the goal, for theistic evolution, the goal, the end, is an existence of integration with the Creator. It is what you might call a theosis, an almost sacramental view where we are embedded in God. Actually, he says this. I think I have it down here. Porcion says, one might say that panentheism is true as an eschatological fulfillment, not as a present reality. So the goal of all of this is panentheism. On judgment, he says, I cannot believe that God will foreclose on his mercy or override human freedom. And he says, takes that haunting parable of judgment, the sheep and the goats. To the sheep, the Lord says that. To the goats, the Lord says the opposite. These words present us with a formidable challenge. But if we take them seriously, do we find ourselves unambiguously in one company or the other? We are neither holy sheep nor holy goat. Perhaps then, now this is issue of judgment, perhaps then, judgment is not simply a retrospective assessment of what we have been, but includes the perspective of what we might become. Perhaps judgment builds up the sheep and diminishes the goat in each one of us. This is theistic evolution's view of the judgment, at least according to Porcion. Conclusion. If we accept panentheism as a true eschatological fulfillment and judgment as an unfinished business where we are, doing goats and sheep, we would have strayed far away from the Adventist understanding of the goal of eschatology as outlined above. Let me conclude. I have 2 minutes. What I have presented to show that theistic evolutionist eschatology is incompatible with Adventist eschatology is really the easy part. That is easy to show by analysis. The difficult part, friends, and in the spirit of what we heard this morning, in love and in wisdom, trying to see what these scientists see that is causing these challenges. Because with what I've done, I can say, okay, QED, code erat demonstratum, finished. Throw them out. But we cannot just abandon science like that. Because these people are seeing things in nature. And I think Angel said it. We have failed to interact with the scientific community, to see with them what they see and come up with biblical solutions. I pray that even as you see that this is incompatible with Adventist eschatology, God will give us the love, the wisdom to meet with our brothers and sisters who are struggling with sincere scientific issues and try to resolve them in a biblical way. Thank you very much.